Welcome to the Harvesting Justice podcast brought to you by Pro Life San Francisco. My name is Robert, and our guest today is Elisa Martinez from New Mexico Alliance for Life. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Robert. It's Elisa.
Yeah, I've only ever read your name,
That's
and
okay.
we've been kind of corresponding like very piecemeal since like, I think maybe 2021 might have been the first time we ever heard from you and your organization. But now we get to learn a lot more from each other. So, Elisa,
Yes, thank you for having me.
I I learned that New Mexico Alliance for Life was started in 2015, and actually just in the months before David Daleiden came out with his undercover work exposing the underbelly of fetal organ solicitation, the criminal element in that field, and just the barbaric nature overall of that process. Pro Life San Francisco was an organization founded in the wake of his expose. So how was it beginning this work? And were you going into fetal tissue research subjects before the summer of 2015? Or what were you kind of focusing on at your founding?
Well, that's a great question, Robert. And I know you and I have talked offline previously, just looking at ways that the pro life movement can investigate and bring accountability to the abortion industry at large. And one thing that I've learned over my years working in the pro life movement is that these folks, since they're willing to end the life of innocent human beings up to the moment of birth, there's a potential for them to play fast and loose with other areas of moral concern and even of legal concerns. So, this area of fetal tissue, I think, has always been something that the movement has been aware that occurs. But I think David and our research as well sort of blew the door open as to our pulling back the curtain as to what goes on behind closed doors. And what we found was appalling, tragic, and we did identify various potential violations of the law that were occurring over at least a 10 to 20-year period.
Something to be very careful about when communicating with the public and trying to like dot all our T's, cross all our I's, because we want to be able to thread the needle accurately, like say, where is the unethical practice occurring? Is it occurring in violation of the law, in line with the law, but still raising heavy levels of public concern to where we should call for an end to it? So, what are some things that the work of the Alliance for Life has found that seem to actually violate the law in terms of these researchers or abortion facilities
Well,
not doing the right thing?
right. So I can kind of go into maybe a timeline. It's interesting that you brought up David Deleiden's work. We at the Alliance for Life, I started the organization at the end of 2014, really as a response to the lack of effective advocacy at our state law and lawmaking level of advocacy. But in New Mexico, we have a legislative session that's only active for either 30 or 60 days every other year. And so during that off time, we started focusing on research and investigative work and utilizing, and I would encourage other activists to look into utilizing open records laws that allow the public to view public records. So in the case of New Mexico, we have the largest state funded university, University of New Mexico, which was participating in fetal tissue research for over 20 years under our very noses that we were not aware of until we started down that path of requesting. I think it started with an open records request for any contracts that the university had with abortion clinics, abortion centers. And so that request came back. We got two contracts that the University of New Mexico had, one with Planned Parenthood, one with Southwestern Women's Options, which was a long-standing late-term abortion killing center in Albuquerque that was owned by Curtis Boyd, who's pretty well known. So interestingly enough, these two contracts, when you looked at them, Planned Parenthood is the largest abortion corporation in the world. So all of the I's and T's were dotted in that contract. But the Southwestern Women's contract with UNM, and they were two different contracts, but the UNM contract with SWO, it was, maybe a page and a half. And didn't contain a lot of the disclaimers and other language that the Planned Parenthood contract contains. So we kind of went down this path of asking for more information. And that's something that, you and I have discussed in the past. It's just like, you never know what you're going to uncover, but, if there's smoke, there's fire, generally speaking.
You'll probably recognize this. This is an example of one of the public
That's
records that you
there
guys
you go.
were uncovered. This was provided to the Alliance for Life by the records officers or custodian at UNM,
Correct.
essentially one of the
I believe
essentially
that was one of,
communications.
yeah, that was the contract. And as you can tell, it doesn't look anything like a contract, I believe, or this might have been a subsequent, yeah, that was a subsequent document that we asked about fetal tissue. And this in particular is the sample consent form that really sparked some red flags for us, because once we started obtaining more information from them about fetal tissue harvesting, and this is something for your advocacy and for other activists out there, those consent forms, if you can get your hand on a copy of the consent forms, if they're public record, again, there's private abortion killing centers out there that aren't going to have, aren't going to be subject to the public records law. But in this case, the contract with UNM was how we were able to obtain that. And it was very concerning because there are a couple, we have state statutes and federal statutes that regulate this practice. And so
Quick,
we can
the
go into.
one of the UCSF ones here for comparison. But as you were saying, it's important for the public to be able to look at the practices in black and white, what they're disclosing.
Well, absolutely. Interestingly enough, and it's really unfortunate, this year in New Mexico, because of the work that we've done here, that we've uncovered, this was started in 2015, was our fetal tissue investigation was launched. So it's 10 years ago. Probably went on for 2 years. We worked with the Congressional Select Panel on Infant Lives. We handed over probably, I don't know, hundreds and hundreds of pages of documentation that we had obtained from the University of New Mexico, but some of it we didn't obtain. And this is what was interesting is we started going down this path, getting more and more documents from the university. They had different policies that they published regarding their fetal tissue harvesting program. And basically what the program was is UNM had a contract with Southwestern Women's Options and Curtis Boyd to harvest fetal tissue on one hand. And then on the other hand, the university was sending residents to train at this late term abortion center free of charge. So in a sense, it was part of a quid pro quo on its face that we uncovered. And shortly after exposing that, and another thing that really is important, as much as we don't necessarily believe everything that comes from the mainstream media can be an ally in putting forth valid claims and valid information that you have citations of, especially in the area of the public interest and public institutions. So we were able to work with the Albuquerque Journal, which is the newspaper of record in New Mexico, to publish a lot of these shocking and alarming findings that we had. So once that was brought to light with this quid pro quo between UNM and SWO, that program, they halted the program of sending residents to this abortion center to train. So that was kind of our first victory in the investigation early on.
The University of New Mexico's abortion training is an arm of the Ryan Residency Training Program that's based here in San Francisco. Overlaps between the abortion world in your state and our state, and more than just this. So the Ryan Residency Training Program, this is a national program, as I'm sure you're aware of. Many of our listeners may not if they haven't followed us for that long, but there are over 100 locations, including UNM, as we can see right here. And thankfully, Southwestern Women's Options was cut out of
Yeah.
UNM's Ryan Residency as a location. And is that still the current state of things, actually?
As far as we know, it is, because UNM has just gotten smarter and they have expanded their abortion empire in New Mexico through state taxpayer dollars, and it's a whole nother program. But our governor, who is very pro-abortion friendly, she's a radical abortion up to birth activist who has funded a state abortion center to the tune of $10 million just 2 years ago by fiat signing of her pen. And then this last legislative session, she did it again. So now we have potentially two $10 million taxpayer funded abortion centers in the works. The first one in Las Cruces, New Mexico, which they do plan to train the next generation of abortionists, which is what the Ryan residency is designed to do. And in my professional opinion, it's also designed to sort of normalize the practice of abortion and healthcare. And that's where you're hearing more and more often this talking point from the pro boards. Abortion is healthcare, right? Well, we know it's not healthcare because they are not treating a disease condition of the body. A pregnancy is a healthy, normal state of the body. So they are trying to normalize elective abortions into healthcare practices. And it starts with this Ryan residency, quite frankly.
To say anything on a public platform where someone would have to take my word for it. I want everything I say to be falsifiable. You're
Right.
able to confirm or correct me. But one private direct message conversation I had on Instagram, this person was pro-choice. They weren't budging on it at all. But I was able to share with them more details about this organ harvesting of aborted babies, and not just organ harvesting. We know from the consent forms that we just pulled up that they're having these solicitation conversations when the mom is still pregnant. Literally, these researchers targeting the moms and babies before there are any fetal remains, before there's any tissue. That child's alive and kicking, and in some circumstances at 24 weeks gestation, even. And this person that I was communicating with, this person who would consider themselves pro choice, a supporter of abortion, of the abortion movement, they were like, no, yeah, that seems suspect to me. That seems like morally unethical. So I think it's just one of the practices of the abortion movement that just can rub a lot of people instinctually the wrong way. It's
Well,
a useful thing to get around like that. Well, this is something that I can defend when you're targeting moms and babies before the abortion even happens.
it really, this is a really important point that I think, if anything, that your viewers and listeners out there take away. And it's just that, right? The problem with this whole enterprise of fetal tissue harvesting, aborted baby harvesting of body parts, and we can go into more of the gruesome specifics. But what we were able to do at New Mexico Alliance for Life, really by the grace of God, was to acquire these consent forms that were not in compliance with the law. And the reason they were not in compliance with the law is because federal and our state statutes at the time were very explicit that the who, what, where, when, the nature of the research had to be disclosed to these women, and they weren't doing that. And the reason that they were not doing that, Robert, is that it humanizes the baby. It humanizes the fact that, well, wait a minute, I'm filling out this form here, and it's saying my baby has value, that the life of my baby and my baby's body has value for science and for research. And when the majority of these women are already in conflict going into those abortion centers, they are already feeling pressured or coerced often, that this is going to quicken their conscience. So that is how we were able to expose this whole operation for the fakery that it was, and how they were literally abusing and preying upon women in a vulnerable state was quite evil and disgusting.
It's very clear multiple different tiers of unethical behavior. So this is something that I found on your site, which goes a level beyond what you were just talking about, where
It's supposed
this consent form.
it's supposed to be an entirely separate consent form. And you're right. Thank you for pulling this up. He wrapped it into all the other consents for the abortion procedure. This is supposed to be a separate form altogether.
They're trying to get the documentation for permission of collecting the fetal body parts on the same form or a separate form. What it does is the idea that, well, if I go forward with this abortion, if I continue down this path, something good will come out of it, something positive and beneficial for the world, this specimen for medical research. But the law states that these consents need to be
Separate.
on separate forms provided
Yes.
afterwards.
And not
That's something
just
we're still
removing,
trying to learn.
when you look at the language here, just removing parts. We'll be removing parts during the procedure, may or may not be used for research. And he lumped that in with all of this other consent that has to do with the abortion procedure itself and potential
There's no way to
emergencies.
opt out of the fetal tissue collection, of the fetal remains collection, if they're wanting to consent for their procedure,
Right.
they can't opt out
Right.
on this form here. And were any charges able to get pushed in regards to this violation right here?
So sadly, this particular consent form um, was being shoved down women's throats that were going into this clinic probably for a good 10 to 15, if not 20 years that we know of. And so, in this process of our investigation, we kept asking for for like a tissue bank, records, a journal, any recordings that they had of what and how and when they were receiving these body parts. Well, they never turned that information over to the New Mexico Alliance for Life. However, Congress, based upon largely David Daleidon's investigation on the Congressional Select Panel on Infant Lives in 2016, I'm a very strong believer in God and the Holy Spirit working together, that we had conducted this whole investigation all of 2015 without even knowing about David Daleidon, without even knowing that there would be a select panel on infant lives. We probably had thousands of documents. I have notebooks, 4 or 5 notebooks this size of documents. So we were able to hand those over to the congressional panel. They, by congressional subpoena, finally received this tissue bank record of all the tissue that UNM called the procurement notes. And we did finally publish that on our website, got that over to the Albuquerque Journal. They published a story with some of the excerpts that were just the most disgusting, evil, grisly, barbaric recordings I've ever had to read in my life. And you had recordings talking about, 17-week pancreas, woohoo, smiley face. Yeah.
Success.
Stomachs, intestines, brains, skin. And so this is something that we want to challenge those on the other side to also examine how the humanity of these babies, these human beings, how they're being treated like trash. And for experimentation to choose and pick and sift through livers and hearts. Uh, it's quite shocking. In fact, in this procurement notebook, which I think it documented a certain time frame. I can't remember exactly how maybe 5 years or less. But they would use the fetal foot length of the baby to be able to determine the gestational age. And so it was quite disgusting and evil and shocking, but they were not being forthright with us. Initially, it took a congressional subpoena to obtain those records.
Getting specific like laboratory research documents,
Mm-hmm.
because one of the reasons that the UCSF custodians were saying is because this research is still ongoing. It is like proprietary information. Like, we don't want our competitors getting a leg up on us. So even though we're a public institution, we're holding this back. And it's great that eventually you were able to, you and the public at large, that we were all able to get our eyes on those procurement notes. Because I was reading about how there was some staff notes in there where someone wrote, asked clinic for digoxin treated tissue 24 to 28 weeks for methylation study. And because, redacted name, wants whole fixed brains to dissect with summer camp students. And
Yes.
I read about the neuroscience summer experience in the summer of 2012. And it's just like, who cares if this was one of the things that was all under legal compliance? This is a real life dystopia that we're living in, actually. And
Right.
it's
Right. Oh, yes. In fact, that particular instance where they had a summer camp with children and this Dr. Oles, we called her Dr. Goals, dissected human brains of a baby that was aborted at 28 weeks in front of children in front of this summer camp, and explicitly ordered that those those brains to be used for that purpose. And there are some potential concerns there, because if I'm the abortionist and I know, well, Dr. So and so is in the back room waiting for brains, I'm going into this abortion procedure mindful of that. And one of the laws that regulate fetal tissue harvesting during abortions requires that there's no changes to the abortion procedure, right? And so that raises questions and concerns for potential violations there. And one of the things that happened as a result of our overall investigation, like I said, that was probably 2 years, 2.5, 3 years long, that Dr. Oles was eventually suspended. She was barred from her lab. Yay! And when the news broke of this summer camp baby brains experiment, it did make national headlines again. The media sometimes does do its job wonderfully, and so that story became viral. It was a national moment. But one of our activists went and confronted the chair of the entire UNM Health Science Center department that kind of oversees all that side of the university. Confronted him, Dr. Paul Roth, in public, got him on record. And there's another viral video of him admitting that, yes, the brains were used and they were from an aborted baby at 28 weeks. And he tried his best to fumble through that to normalize it. But it's just so disgusting, right? Like, people were just disgusted. Shortly after that, before his tenure was up, he resigned. Dr. Paul Roth also resigned from his position. And I think it's probably about 80% of the individuals at UNM that were involved with the fetal tissue harvesting and abortion empire, their enterprise, either resigned, quit, or relocated. So it was a tremendous victory in bringing about accountability and justice for women and those.
This subject, there's a huge risk to becoming desensitized to the point where you're not, treating the children and the families connected to these documents, connected to these cases with the proper respect. Sometimes, in order to go through this information, to go through all of these research studies, these, lab experiments, we have to compartmentalize. I'm sure you've gone through that a lot, right? Just treat it like a textbook
You have
and not
to.
bring in your emotions.
I mean, yeah, to some extent you have to, because it's so gruesome. It's so evil, as you said, dystopic. You can't believe what you're reading. But working with women, we were able to obtain consent forms from actual victims, from women that had obtained abortions at this killing at Southwest Women's Options during the time frame they were doing the harvesting, and match some of those time frames up with the procurement logs, because they did keep some record of the gestational ages. We have some victims out there that were very troubled, who did regret. I think every single one of them I've worked with has regretted their abortion, especially after knowing their baby had value. Each story, as you know, Robert, I hear these stories all the time. Each story is unique and different, but similar, because they don't really want to have an abortion, but somebody is in their ear, including the staff, and including those that serve to profit, that have a financial interest in this woman going through the abortion. Yes, I mean, I cannot help but really am kind of wear those hearts on my sleeve, which is why we do what we do. That's why what gets me up every day to push forward, is because oftentimes these women are being lied to, they're being pressured, they're being coerced, and they're going through an abortion that they think they're being told is the right thing to do at that time, and later have very tremendous, heavy, lifelong regret.
In New Mexico, I think I read that the Alliance for Life wasn't like directly involved, but was able to like help get it moving. A woman, last name Duran, Jessica
Yeah.
Duran, and she did not give consent for baby's remains, yet those body parts were shipped to researchers anyways. What can you tell me about that case, since we're talking about
Right.
the human impact of this and the need to check back in fully emotionally? Emotions drive our work on this. It drives us to research, gather these records, get it out to the public. Tapping back into our emotions that drive us to do all the work. Hearing these stories is a really important tool in that.
Oh, absolutely. Jessica is um, just another scenario that, gosh, it's really sometimes touching, but also so tragic, because Jessica, I think she was 16 weeks, maybe, ran Albuquerque resident, was told by the father of the child at the time to go through with the abortion. She was also felt pressured by family members who told her, "Look, our family doesn't believe in abortion, but you have no business bringing this baby into this situation for whatever reason." We hear all these reasons: financial, emotional, school issue. She, I think, was in and out of the Southwest Women's Options at least 3 times before she finally went through. And interestingly enough, at a lot of these businesses, women are not allowed to bring their telephone in. They're not allowed to bring a third party, a support person with them into the operating area. Once they go into the back rooms of the clinic, they're not allowed anyone else contact with the outside world. Why? Because they could change their mind, right? And so such was the case with Jessica. And the most tragic part of this, so she had to leave her cell phone in her car. She couldn't even bring her phone into the waiting room. Left the phone in the car. Her mom was outside in the waiting room, who was not allowed access with her back. She goes through with the abortion, goes back to her car, and she sees a text from the boyfriend at the time. Hey, let's keep this baby. I will help you. So by then it was too late. And the same thing, her mom, I believe, she tells a story that her mom was trying to go and rescue her as well, and was knocking and banging on the door to try to get back there to offer her support after changing her mind as well. And it was just too late. And so these women have to carry, uh, you know, this tragedy with them.
Burden on their own. It's
Yes.
horrible.
So so that was the case of Jessica, and there was litigation. I believe it was filed on her behalf for the use of the baby body parts that corresponded with a procurement note taken of body part harvested. And I'm not sure what the status is of that, but another one of hundreds of tragic cases that we hear of every day.
That organization like yours exists to empower women with better choices, with informed choices when they're experiencing difficult pregnancies and experiencing all of these life situations where they're not receiving the support they need at the time where they most need it to be most communicated to, that we're here to live life alongside you, to help you with your child in this moment. And that's another reason why people who consider themselves pro-life, it's important to get involved in the effort. We can't just hold our opinions to ourselves. I was that way for so long. Our society is kind of twisted on this issue. I need to speak up about it. It's so important that we do and see where our tools, our talents, and our resources can go towards solving this problem and getting to a more healthy place.
Right. Well, and I think it's having a real discussion about what it is, what it involves, that the abortion industry has all the money in the world to try to, well, they do own the discussion for the most part because of all the resources, but really to humanize the pain that these women feel because they're not allowed to have a regret, or they're not allowed to have a negative experience because abortion lobby is so vocal in normalizing and minimizing those experiences. And then on the other side of it is humanizing the human beings, the babies that are involved. And that's where this fetal tissue side of the issue really does that. And the more that we can bring to light, and I would challenge some folks that maybe are on the other side today to look at those procurement notes, and you can't tell me that you're not moved in some way, that it's not appalling and potentially evil, not unlike the research that was done on the victims of Joseph Mengele in Nazi Germany. And that's really, out of that whole moment in history, is what gave rise to human research protocols, consent, and respect for the life and dignity of the human person. It's this gray area when it comes to abortion that the abortion lobby has tried to skirt, but the laws are still very much intact and very much require full consent, at least of the woman. And when we can dive into what are they doing? Recently we found, I think they were trying to transplant the scalps of human babies that were aborted babies' scalps onto mice. And in fact, I think one of the studies at UNM involves something similar to that. And so bringing these things to light can help quicken the conscience of other individuals that may not quite understand the full scope of it.
I wanted to pinpoint what you were talking about a moment ago about how consent forms that they give to abortion patients, the people waiting for a procedure, they ask the question, are you willing to donate pregnancy tissue? That's the phrase they use in San Francisco by UCSF. They call the specimens pregnancy tissue, but then to, the actual research, the laboratory, studies that they publish, they'll say human fetal salivary glands at 22 to 24
Oh
weeks.
my God.
You can find the full study. We link to it on our website. And they'll talk about how on the study design, which is basically the documents before any of the solicitation, before any of the dissections and experiments. It says what we intend to do, what we wish to receive funding for from federal government, from state sources. They talk about literally using metal tools to scrape these children. And it's just hard to put words to it sometimes that
Yeah.
they're not using the same language when talking
Right.
to the moms.
Right.
They're
It's
not
just tissue.
saying
Tissue.
pregnancy tissue versus a child, or pregnancy tissue versus the literal, intestines that they want to use. Sometimes people will say, "Well, you're going too hard on emotion." Well, I feel the problem is sometimes I don't go into emotion enough. It's not something that people should take lightly.
No. No, and it's disgusting. I mean, it's quite frankly disgusting, especially when you lump study after study, which is what we experienced in our investigation, because the select panel was only active for 1 year in 2016. So we really had to work around the clock to expose as many of these types of studies. We found some that I believe had, gosh, it was like 18 to 24 fetal hearts that were used. And, if you look at, oh gosh, it's planted
First ones that I saw this back in 2018.
transplanted subcutaneously on the back of a 6 to 8 week old male. A single intact segment.
Yeah, they implanted the intestinal organ tissues of these babies under the skin of these lab rats. Being open, like in this particular medical journal article, this study, I didn't see any indication of any law being broken, but I sure see something wrong in this picture
Well,
here.
I
This
think
isn't
just bringing
something.
this to light would be very important.
Are your recommendations for the next steps of the public awareness campaign against fetal organ solicitation, this targeting of parents, against this aborted fetal tissue research? Like, how can we move up from what we've been currently doing?
For your organization or for the movement at large?
What would you say is important for things like, I'm sure there's some things that you've been able to get going in New Mexico that haven't seen the light of day in San Francisco quite yet. We've done a lot of leafleting. We've published about our campaign in the Christian Post and the Daily Wire. We'd love to see more institutions covering this, but sometimes the news outlets just don't want to highlight this issue.
Right. Well, I think as of late, there is a reticence on the part of conservative movement to talk about abortion anymore because it's perceived as a losing issue, which is not true. We again just don't have the resources that Planned Parenthood does to buy elections, quite frankly. So that is where I believe that we have to continue to build public support, and instead of going into these situations assuming that the world is against us, and maybe sometimes they are, the numbers are in our favor across the country. Americans want to see abortion limited to the first trimester, as I said earlier. So you have to go in with that assumption that we are the majority and we have to work towards making abortion unthinkable and unnecessary, but also humanizing the aspect of the human beings that are involved. These are babies. They're moving. They respond to touch at 8 weeks. They have a heartbeat. They, for the most part, until later pregnancy, they don't have the dampeners to dampen their experience of pain. So their experience of pain is greater. They're being dismembered alive in surgical abortions or extracted from their home. They're being orphaned. They are human beings, and they have all the human DNA that supports that. That is what the science supports, and that's why they're being coveted for their human qualities in human tissue research. And I think those are discussions that you can have, and then continuing to bring to light the gruesome and requesting information around that. Like I said, it just started with one contract. We just requested a contract. And then from there, we just kept requesting more information. But be careful, because this past legislative session in New Mexico, the woman who is in charge of the whole abortion family planning department in New Mexico, she is a national figure, former president of Society of Family Planning and other national organizations. Dr. Eve Espy was the expert witness on a bill to completely ban any abortion related information from our New Mexico's inspection of public records law. And that law, yes, yes.
That's
So
crazy.
they exempted themselves from public records requests because, of yours truly and the work of a few others here in New Mexico. But, I had to testify against that bill, and the lack of transparency and why are they trying to exempt themselves? And really, it reflects this authoritarian mentality that the pro-abortion lobby has, and I'm sure you've seen it. There's their arrogance is only outdone by their ignorance at times, and this heavy-handedness, but also it's their golden cow, their golden calf that they're going to protect at all costs. And so then we have a federal records law, and so we continue to request for information via the federal inspection of open records. But that's how far they've gone here in New Mexico. Be
Yeah.
advised.
Yeah. The brick wall that we've run up against in our state has been trying to prevail upon the Board of Regents of the University of California system. They have about 11 medical schools in their university system, including UC San Francisco. For several years, we've gone to their board meetings and expecting or hoping for a response, even if it's a debate, them at least putting out a public statement of, we know what these people are saying at our meetings and we disagree because of XYZ. Radio silence. So it's important to be able to continue, if I'm getting what you're saying, continue finding the avenues to get the information and to have more conversations with the public, like something that's could be more long form, more educational, like would you say like a seminar or something along that line might be a good way to get this information into discussion format rather
Well,
than just leafleting or trying to do public
I
comments
mean,
to
and I do.
unresponsive officials?
Sorry, I don't envy you, because I think it's a little bit more liberal out there where you're at. But find partnerships. As you said, there are regional partners, but you can also find local partnerships. We partner often with our state lawmakers, and I'm sure there are a good number of them in California that you can partner with, have seminars with, and educate with as well, because they automatically have a platform, right? So it's a lot harder for you and I to get the media's attention, but these individuals do have a platform, and there are good representatives and senators out there, maybe not at the federal level in California, but at least at the state level, that you can work with, partner with, put on the seminars with, introduce legislation that automatically will get you some buy-in with the media, submitting op-eds, exposing some of the more gruesome aspects. And I think your approach as well in terms of, yes, you don't want to be emotional, but some of this is very emotional. The left always plays into emotions. It's good to be emotional at times, but always factual, which I think you are, and we all strive to be. We all have to be. The truth is damaging enough. We don't have to embellish, unlike the other side that often has to suppress the truth. And I want to say it was I think Augustine or Aquinas, but basically the truth is like a lion. You just have to set it free. And so I would, challenge you with continuing that work. Is just exposing the darkness.
And everybody listening, you can find the work of New Mexico Alliance for Life, the procurement notes, all of the research and all of the successes that they've had on their website. Go ahead and plug the website real quick.
Sure, it's www.nmallianceforlife.org. There is a drop down box of procurement notes. Read that. Read all of the findings from the select panel as well. Be informed, and we just hope and continue to pray that hearts will be changed, and that we will continue to be empowered to shed a light on the darkness in the area. Thank you guys.
I'm gonna hit stop here. We can
Okay.
continue talking on the